Thanks so much. I'll focus on the long-term future, but if we can be present right now, try to be mindful, just be right in the present. At the same time, those of you who wish to use your iPhone, please do as you need. If I can't keep you away from the phone, then obviously I don't know what I'm doing. So this is really about the long-term future. It's very much focused on the notion of Gaia, the planet as a living system. But I do want to start with the hard stuff. The hard stuff comes from interpretations of Gramsci that in effect we're in a transition. And then transition is difficult, whether the lights go off, the new renewable systems can't hold, the grid is unstable, or we're unstable. So Gramsci's was, he didn't say it, but during this transition, morbid systems come out. We want to be symbiotic, connecting with self, other, nature, tech, but there is real morbidity that emerges. So this is our transition in the difficulty, and the difficulty of the transition. But now let's move further out. Those of you who know of the Russian physicist Nikolai Kardashev, he asked a really important question. He said, why do we have no empirical, verifiable accounts of aliens in our midst? Now, one of you may be an alien, I don't doubt it, but I have no empirical, measurable way to know that. So Kardashev's conclusion was, one conclusion is it's impossible. He said, no, he's a physicist. Of course there's aliens. But why is there no contact? Hypothesis one, planets go through evolution and they come to our ability, meaning fractured governance and the need for endless energy. That contradiction creates one outcome, nuclear annihilation or climate change annihilation. The reason why we have no contact is because other planets destroy themselves. So the challenge of our times is how do we resolve the contradiction for the need of global governance and our need for energy to supply that. The failure to do that would lead to annihilation. His conclusion is, can we go from a type 0 planet to a type 1 planet? A type 1 planet has a functioning world government with a grid of renewables. If we do that well, in 200 years, we have the possibility of becoming a type 1 planet. But there's always the danger of asteroids. That becomes a type 2 planet, meaning energy is not just renewables on this planet. We have the entire solar system, what's called a stellar planet. If we do that well, in 1,000 years, we move to a type 3 planet, which essentially is a spiritual planet. We've evolved so far that spirit creates mind, mind creates matter. Our consciousness is symbiotic with nature. Our consciousness is symbiotic with tech. That's the transition. So then he asked the question, well, maybe it's happened somewhere in the cosmos. Why would a type 3 planet not contact us? Anyone? I'm asking you folks. Why would a type 3 planet not contact us in 2025? Okay, you can reflect on that. Type 2 planet, the waves don't work. Type 1 planet, they all disappear. So this is the key thing, is we're not just in a transition to 2026. We're in a transition for the next 1,000 years, and this is why, for me, we're together here. As futurists, given there's no data about the future, we study imaginations. We study the emerging image of the future. One of my teachers, Oliver Markley, says the image of the future leads reality. Our purpose of futurists is to ensure there's a thriving, inviting, attractive vision of the future. If you do that well, you start to lead. However, parliaments take a while. The president of the European Commission said, we know what the right thing to do on climate change is. We know the right thing. None of us believe we can get elected on it. I was working with one city council. We were trying to work out their 2050 vision. I said, we can be green, we can use tech, we can make it safe for old people. Here's all the things we can do. And finally, one of the counselors came up to me, and he said, Sohail, and I apologize for what he said, we actually don't give a fuck. And I said, so why are you a counselor? He says, we want to get reelected. Can you tell me how to do that? So this is the contradiction between the vision of the future and the reality of today. But that changes. In the 70s, it was a classic book, Should Trees Have Standing, which started the whole notion of the legal rights of nature, which I think you're trying to do here. That then goes further, and we talk about a planet that has legal rights. At the same time, climate change is about not just global warming, and it's not just about being Kodak, which Silicon Valley people say, if you don't adapt, you get Kodak. We're actually talking about being Pompeii, meaning planetary extinction again. So that's our big challenge. So I, in my work, get to work with fantastic people. Last year I was working in Bangkok with the United Nations, and we had 30 brilliant directors in the room. And we were doing a two-day futures workshop. And as I said, how do you feel? They said, oh, we're depressed. We're suicidal. We're ashamed. This was right during the war against Ukraine and before the war in Gaza. And then I said, so what does this feel like for you? They said, we have a small whistle. We're in a football pitch, and no one listens to us. So there was a feeling you don't have agency, you can't make a difference. So I said, okay, that's your lived reality. No one's denying that. Anything you want to do won't matter because we have a world government. It's called the Security Council. It's just a poorly functioning one. All your efforts in the world government don't work. So yes, we feel bad. The only thing I added was actually it's 11 players. Each one thinks they're Ronaldo or Lionel Messi. They say, yeah, that's our condition. So what would you recommend as a better metaphor for the UN official? You can yell it out or just think about it. They feel they're a referee with a small whistle. So anything they try to do fails because one of the 5 powers vetoes any attempt for whatever you want to do. They make it impossible. Anyone? What's a better metaphor? Yeah, you have to work too, not just me. You're just like, it's a free show? Just because you paid at the door. Okay, so try to reflect, what's a better metaphor? Now, when I ask groups around the world, this is what they tell me. If you ask engineers, it's a simple solution, get a bigger whistle. If you ask spiritual people, they said, become like Mandela. Develop compassion. Don't see monsters, see angels and love everywhere. If you ask capitalists, they said the issue is easy. Buy the football field. Buy the pitch. The only way we can solve the world's problems if Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg run the Security Council. Let the billionaires run things. They're the smartest. If you ask futurists, they said, why are we playing football? We need a new pitch, a new story. So this is our challenge. We want to change the system. But again, if we're too far, then people freak out. I presented to 500 farmers in a meeting on the future of meat, and I talked about the end of meat. And during the meeting, people started to scream at me. They started to yell at me. They got very insulted. And then later, when I met them, they said, we apologize, we were so rude. Can we buy some of your books? I said, okay, that's a step, but we need to go further. And then I asked why. They said, it's all too difficult for us. The challenge, we're already under attack. We can't handle the challenges. So I said, let's develop some scenarios. What can you do differently? Given the rise of vegetarianism, veganism, in vitro meat, they said, our solutions are easy. Give me solution 1. They said, kill the vegans. Okay. I said, okay, what's your solution 2? Kill the scientists. What's your solution 3? Kill coffee drinkers. So I said, okay, I get vegans and scientists. That's easy. We can all agree they should be killed. But why coffee drinkers? They said, they're early adopters. In every city, it's young people drinking coffee in the morning and making trouble. If we eliminate them, life is beautiful. So then I went to Roma, the center of meat production in Australia, and I had them in the room. I said, what do we do differently? So we had to find a way forward. The way forward one, instead of killing the vegans, let's work together around health. Instead of killing the scientists, every farmer in the world should become a scientist. AI should be for the local farmer. Instead of killing coffee drinkers, become an early adopter, develop medical cannabis. So the poles are apart, but you can bring them together through conflict transformation. If you know Ivana Milich's work, she focuses on how you can take different scenarios, move people together, and move them forward. So this is our challenge here. We live in organizations that are in the wrong century. I was in a place called OECD, you might have heard about it, and I said, what? And they said, we're stuck. Why are you stuck? We live in silos. We don't have AI. We can't handle climate change, and we're behind everyone else. Everyone goes to Davos, no one cares about Paris, except for that show, that French real estate show, the Parisian agency. So I said, who are you? They said, we're a French chateau. Great to look at, but a total waste of time. I apologize for those of you who own a French chateau. So I said, where do you want to go? We have to become like a glass house. The light comes in, becomes a rainbow. We have to become diverse. The light comes in, and we have to focus not on GDP, but on well-being. So it's the French chateau to the lighthouse. We at OECD have to make the shift. So most organizations now understand they're about to be Kodak, they have to change. Our role in foresight is to help them go from the official description to the new narrative. Doing that requires mindfulness, slowing down. It can't just be a new story. You have to slow your breathing down, go into deep meditation, so when you slow down, you can see things differently. That becomes the leadership challenge. The organizer said, okay, you can talk about what you want, but make sure you talk about what's futures thinking. So I'll give you 3 examples of this. 1, future studies is the discipline, futures thinking, the mindset, and then the literacy, here's the toolkit you need. And this started in the early 60s, the toolkits all came out in the 70s, 80s, and now every year we have a fantastic new toolkit, and we're really happy about that. So the first way to use the future is to imagine differently. So Rokia Hussain had the first feminist future in Bangladesh, and she called it Ladyland. So she's among the first futurists you probably haven't heard of. Now, once you start to imagine differently, you have to challenge the imagination. When we were working in Brisbane on 2070, here's what they came up with. In critical theory, we asked, what's missing? What's missing in that image? Yeah, people are always the problem. Right? As Stalin said, no man, no problem. Our role in a different type of future, you ask an 11-year-old. Look at Ashley's vision. The critical part of what Ashley does here, the future is not objective, it's a co-design, iterative, she's in the future. It's not them, it's all of us, it's symbiotic. People are there, so is green, so is tech. The second thing we do in foresight is anticipatory systems. For the last 20 years, I've been working with Interpol, international policing, and they always say we're always one step behind organized crime. I said, why? They said, well, organized crime is agile, adaptive, future-oriented. They're always into co-designing. They're always cooperative. They're always flat. So when young people ask me, what should I do for my future, Sohail? I said, obvious, join organized crime. Interpol always gets unhappy. So I said, well, then change who you are. Stop being behind organized crime. So Graham Malter in the 50s said, there's a scientific way to get ahead of the curve. Look for the weak signals, the early adopters, what are they talking about? So I'll give you 2 examples. One is when we were working with the Australian National Energy Commission, they said for 2 hours in the day, we have too much energy. We have to force people to buy energy because we've entered energy abundance, what they call oversupply. As a non-economist, that means you've solved scarcity. Yes, we have. But we don't have the grid to manage abundance yet. So that's the emerging issue. Imagine a planet with energy abundance, and you have safety guards, batteries, etc. The second thing, we were working in Bangkok, and their emerging issue was a real-time Buddha. You wake up, what do I do? Should I have coffee? No, the Buddhist says, it's time for your morning meditation. You're angry at the person on the street. Should I yell at them, tell them they're morons? No. The real-time Buddha emerges as compassion. Look at them. So they said, can we invent a real-time Buddha? And the room had young people, had monks, had techies. Of course we can. So my colleague, she's invented a digital twin of me who's a much better version. You can ask my wife. I asked the twin, you were having a disagreement, what do you recommend? And the twin took my wife's side. So you got to watch out with digital twins. They create their own persona. The third way to think about the future is macro history, the long-term patterns. It looks like today is like tomorrow, but it's not. I did a book with Johann Galtung, who just passed away, lived very close here in Almas, Spain, and it was 4 books actually. And the conclusion was there's deep patterns going back thousands of years. Pattern 1 is cyclical decline. There's a leader over 50 years, 30 years, every generation gets worse till generation 4 is show me the money. They don't work hard. They don't have what's called the Bedouin energy to create something new, and they don't have unity. And you can look at many countries in the world, you can see that decline quite dramatically. The responsive decline emerged in Europe with Joaquin de Flor, through Auguste Comte and Joaquin de Fiora. This amazing monk, he took the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost and made it into a linear trajectory. He took what was spiritual and made it into macro history, 3 stages of humans. Auguste Comte takes it up and says, aha, theological, metaphysical, and now scientific. This creates the scientific revolution why the West won and basically took over the world. That works until 2025 when it all falls apart. It's been falling apart for 50 years, but this is the final fault lines now. Whether it's tariff, invade Canada, Greenland, end of security umbrella, saying climate change is ridiculous, medical science is ridiculous, and of course genocide's attacks. So you have the 5 huge fault lines. Everything that worked for 500 years is now on the cusp of the fault line. The core of it is trust. The imagination of the future is be like the West, everything will work out. That trust is, to me, irrevocably broken. So the global system now has no imagination of the future. Who should I be like when I grow up, Mom? Organized crime, meaning move to Washington, or somewhere else? They asked to videotape this. I go, yeah, right. Sorkin says, no, you got this wrong. There's pendulums. It looks like it's all declining, but maybe it's just back and forth. Be patient. There's always centralized decentralization, trust, broken trust. So that thing we have to see. For me, it's very clear this is a bifurcation moment. Was it a bifurcation decade or moment? We know when transitions, we become symbiotic, transformation, or we collapse. Now, you may argue we can muddle through, but let's see. The last way to see the future I want to focus on is we don't know the future. I'm giving you patterns, I'm giving you anecdotes, but in reality, we don't know. So we do scenarios. So scenario 1 is the no change. If I follow my interests, you follow your interests, we're going to create heaven on earth, right? Protestant ethic. Work hard, follow your interests, everything's going to be okay. That works until you remember Adam Smith lived in an empire. So if everyone in an empire follows their interests, it all works out for everyone in the empire. Those outside, screw them. So this becomes nation-state centric by, that's scenario 1. Invisible hand, everything works out. If it's your empire, you get inequity. Scenario 2 is marginal change, the visible hand. What Japan figured out, what Korea figured out. They said, no, the state intervenes to ensure there's no externalities to nature and individuals. Conclusion, you have the rise of East Asia. The visible hand, what's called inclusive capitalism by the Davos gang. You bring all the stakeholders in. The other part of the visible hand, you can support or you can use the state to destroy. That's fascism. That's what we're seeing everywhere now. Now there's a third scenario. Well, the third scenario is shared hands. At one level, you have a functioning world government, meaning not just 5 members, not just expanding veto power, but changing the eligibility to be in the UN. Nature, young people, communities, even business, NGOs, you change the notion of what's called governance. Second part, shared hand, means you go from platform corporatism to platform cooperativism. The invisible hand is for individuals, so you have freedom. The middle part of the economy is shared hands, and you still have state intervention. This is called Prout by the Indian philosopher Sarkar. It's called a new club. It's efficient. You go from taxis, which suck, Uber, which is better, but the shared hands, the Uber drivers, have a cooperative, and they get the profits. But the last scenario is what's called magical hands. If you go 100 years from now, spirit creates mind, creates matter, mind enters tech, and you get amazing AI, and you start to imagine a world after global governance because we're symbiotic. This scenario should make no sense to anyone in the room. That's the purpose of foresight. We should be outside what's intelligible. Magical hands is a spiritual tech scenario. So this starts to go in, what's the next 500 years like? My hypothesis is this. If we expand a real global governance, real spiritual episteme, gender partnership, planetary system, AI-driven economy, meaning we've gone from a type 0 planet to a type 1 planet with a possibility of a type 2 planet. In the meantime, let's go back to Sorokin. The 1960s was the imagination of John Lennon, a world outside the nation state, right? Driven by love. By 2025, it's like, no, it's about naked power. A dramatic pendulum shift. Sorokin says it could shift again, get focused. You can still go towards humanity, whereas Gramsci said, this is the transition, the intergum, the possible time of monsters. That's our challenge here. So what do? Sarkar talked about shared hands. To do that, you have to become the leader. You have to become the Mandela. So futures is about patterns, imagination, but foresight without you being in the future doesn't work. You're making the difference. He called it the Sadvipra. Protects, serves, understands the economy, and innovates with new ideas, does all four. Worker, warrior, intellectual capitalist. If you remember the 14th century debate, right? Those of you who were there then, in between the castle and the cathedral, right? That was a 100-year debate which was resolved by the markets. We're now in a 100-year debate again. What's after the markets, the castle, and the cathedral? That's what we're trying to create now. That's the next 50 years. So this goes back to yourself. Become the new leader, and this takes effort. 20 years ago, I was running a workshop, and it was a full-day process with my colleague, Rob Burke. The CEO loved it, the vice president loved it, but the second vice president hated us. She spent 9 hours attacking us personally. 4 o'clock, she says, you two are a total waste of time. So, you get kind of personal. And it was painful. Their metaphor was Cinderella, because the workshop was in the future of funding. I said, what do you mean Cinderella? They said, we're always waiting for the kiss of Prince Charming. I said, who's Prince Charming? They said, government funding. All we do is you write stupid grants hoping one of them will make it. So I said, well, you need different scenarios. So we're stuck as Cinderella. So now the second vice president, now she gets very angry, so I ask her, what's going on for you? And she said, well, you're so stupid you can't figure it out. So then I said, okay, then if I'm so stupid, tell me. She goes, I'm the wicked stepsister. And the whole room understood that she was going to sabotage the project because she was jealous of the other vice president. And so then my failure to be mindful, to be present, I learned right then. I went to fear, not into how do I help this person transform? So what's a better metaphor for her? Anyone? What could I have suggested to her? Yeah, fairy godmother. Protective, wise, powerful. But my inability meant she stayed the wicked stepsister, and I'm sure is living a horrible life in some daycare center somewhere. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about that. So our goal is the personal part as well. I had 10 detectives in a room, all in their 60s. And I had one detective, 28. And we took them through what's called CLA of the self. Look at layered analysis on your own story. And he presented, he grew up in a hierarchical situation. He was always the smartest. He was around stupid people all his time, but he's the smartest. So I said, what's your metaphor today in policing? He goes, oh, I'm an iPhone in a room full of Nokias. And the Nokias were on the next table. So I thought, oh God, this guy's fired Monday morning. So I said, okay, that sounds good. I said, but foresight is not just what's happening. Foresight is how do you change yourself in a and just not yourself, in some symbiotic way, how do you change nature and tech and people around you? So he said, aha, I'm the co-created chip maker. I co-design prevention through new technologies so we have a safer city. Now he has a better story, and the 7 detectives looking at him said, okay, he's okay. But that's not enough for us, because the new metaphor was still rational through inquiry investigation. So then we took him on a journey of a meditative state, closed eyes. What does your world look like in 2030? Let your future self speak to you. And he came, I said, what did you see? He said, I saw the brilliance of the warm sun. And I said, what does that mean for you? He said, the solution to better policing is love. And the detectives looked at him and said, okay, this guy's now really gone way out. And I said, what does that mean for you? He said, I've always been focused on intelligence in terms of pattern recognition. I now see intelligence as emotional or spiritual. I have to connect with other people so we become better. So this was quite profound. So 6 months later, I called someone who knew the commissioner. I said, what happened to our 28-year-old detective? They said, oh, we just loved everything he did. He's quickly on the fast track and being promoted. We understood he brings qualities that we need. So future starts out external, ends up internal. Let's go back to physics. I was lucky in a car where I was with the head of UN SETI program, Mazlan Atman. So the UN SETI program is a search for extra intelligence. I said, Mazlan, you're way out there for me. I got 10 minutes in a taxi with you. Tell me the future of human evolution by the year 3000. And she goes, well, the answer is obvious. I said, what's that? She goes, evolution will always favor the efficient. The invisible hand fails because it's inefficient because it throws out nature and people. Visible hand is better, shared hands is far more efficient. Efficiency means deep inclusion, which she called the wise green society, which you're calling symbiosis. That's far more efficient, so evolution will favor the efficient. Our role is to become the exception, to do something different. I know most of you are mutants here. It's owning up to your mutation. How do you become different and use that mutation for the greater good? So that leaves you the question, what we learned from Mandela, it's always impossible until it's done. Ask yourself as we finish here, what's impossible today for you, but if possible, changes everything. Thanks for your time.